Samuel Foster had learned many things during his years as a diplomat, but the most important lesson was simple. Never underestimate how strange a day could become when it started on another planet. The transport shuttle descended slowly through the pale atmosphere of Lumina Prime, its hull glowing faintly as the planet's crystalline particles scattered light across the sky. Outside the window, the world shimmered like a field of diamonds, stretching beyond the horizon. Mountains of transparent crystal rose from the ground like frozen waves, catching the sunlight and bending it into endless ribbons of color. Samuel leaned slightly toward the window, studying the landscape with quiet fascination. Even after years of traveling between alien systems, some places still had the power to make him feel like a wide-eyed tourist again. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the pilot said over the cabin speaker. Samuel nodded even though the pilot could not see him. "It's like someone dropped a chandelier the size of a continent." "That's actually not the worst description I've heard," the pilot replied. "Last diplomat said it looked like a giant jewelry store exploded." Samuel chuckled softly. He suspected that description might have been closer to the truth. He adjusted the collar of his uniform and reached briefly for the small chain resting beneath the fabric. His fingers found the familiar shape of the medallion hanging around his neck. The metal felt warm. It always did. For 25 years, the medallion had rarely left him. Some people carried photographs. Others kept lucky coins or trinkets. Samuel carried a piece of metal given to him by a girl whose name he had never known. The memory surfaced easily, as it always did when he touched it. Smoke, crowds, sirens screaming across a sky filled with ships. He had been 9 years old and absolutely certain that the universe had decided to end that afternoon. The evacuation station had been chaos. Humans, alien refugees, soldiers shouting instructions no one seemed able to follow. Samuel remembered gripping a railing so tightly his fingers had hurt. His parents had been somewhere in the crowd, trying to secure transport, and he had been very sure he was about to be left behind. That was when the girl appeared. She had looked almost human, except for her long ears that curved gracefully behind her hair. Even as a child, she carried herself with a strange calm, as if the chaos around them had somehow forgotten to frighten her. She had walked directly up to him, studied his terrified face, and placed something small into his hand. "This will keep you safe," she had said. 9-year-old Samuel had not been entirely convinced. At that point, a large spaceship, a defensive army, and possibly a miracle would have seemed more reliable. But he had kept the medallion anyway, because she had believed it. The shuttle vibrated gently as it began its final descent. Samuel blinked the memory away and returned to the present. The capital city of Lumina Prime spread beneath them now, built between enormous crystal formations that glowed softly from within. Towers of polished mineral rose alongside elegant alien structures whose architecture curved like flowing water. Samuel exhaled slowly. Diplomatic mission, peace negotiations. Nothing dramatic, hopefully. He straightened in his seat as the shuttle touched down smoothly on the landing platform. A moment later, the hatch opened with a quiet hiss, revealing the luminous city beyond. Waiting for him were several officials from Lumina Prime. Their tall, slender forms and long ears confirmed what Samuel already knew about the species. Their expressions were polite but cautious. One of them stepped forward. "Diplomat Samuel Foster," the official said, his voice calm and musical. "Welcome to Lumina Prime." Samuel stepped down from the shuttle and gave a respectful nod. "Thank you. I have to say, your planet is stunning." "We are pleased that you approve." Samuel glanced around again at the endless crystal structures. "If any of your buildings accidentally fall over," he added thoughtfully, "humanity would like to officially volunteer to collect the pieces." The officials stared at him. Samuel waited. After a few seconds, one of them tilted his head slightly. "You wish to steal our architecture?" Samuel raised both hands innocently. "Not steal, borrow permanently." A pause followed. Then, to Samuel's relief, one of the younger officials let out a quiet laugh. The tension in the group softened immediately. Samuel smiled. Diplomacy, he had learned, often worked best when people remembered they were allowed to laugh. As they began walking toward the transport vehicle waiting nearby, Samuel felt the medallion shift slightly against his chest. For a brief moment, the metal grew warmer. Samuel frowned slightly. "Strange," he murmured. The official walking beside him glanced over. "Did you say something?" Samuel shook his head. "No," he said lightly. Just talking to my good luck charm. He did not know why, but something about this planet made the medallion feel almost awake. And somewhere deep in his memory, the image of a brave alien girl with long ears stirred quietly, as if the past had decided it was not finished with him yet. The vehicle that carried Samuel through the capital of Lumina Prime moved without wheels or visible propulsion. It hovered a few centimeters above the crystal roadway, gliding forward with the silent confidence of technology that had long ago solved problems humanity was still arguing about in engineering conferences. Samuel sat comfortably in the back seat, trying very hard not to stare like a tourist. He failed. Outside the transparent walls of the transport, the city shimmered. Towering crystal spires rose like frozen lightning bolts, each one glowing softly from deep within. The light was not harsh like artificial illumination. It was gentle, warm, almost alive. Streets curved gracefully between the formations, filled with elegant structures that seemed grown rather than built. Samuel leaned slightly closer to the window. "Your planet looks like someone designed it specifically to make photographers cry," he said. The alien official sitting across from him tilted his head. "Cry? From happiness," Samuel clarified quickly. "Or envy, possibly both." The official considered this. "We will inform our architects they have succeeded." Samuel smiled faintly and settled back in his seat. His diplomatic training told him to remain composed, but curiosity was stronger than etiquette. Every few seconds, he noticed some new detail. Floating transport lanes higher in the air, small drones weaving carefully between the towers, faint streams of glowing particles drifting through the atmosphere like slow snowfall. "What are those?" Samuel asked, pointing upward. "Luminal fragments," the official replied. "Microscopic crystal particles native to our atmosphere. They refract light and stabilize the planet's energy fields." Samuel nodded slowly. "So basically your entire sky is made of shiny science." "That is an acceptable description." Samuel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Earth scientists are going to be extremely jealous." The official's expression remained calm, but Samuel suspected amusement hiding beneath the surface. The vehicle turned smoothly into a wider avenue leading toward the palace district. Here the crystal formations grew even larger, some rising hundreds of meters into the sky. Bridges of transparent material connected them high above the streets, creating an intricate network of walkways that glowed like strands of light. Samuel felt the medallion shift faintly against his chest again. Warm, not hot, just warm enough to notice. He casually touched it through his uniform. Still there, still the same, still the small, unremarkable piece of metal he had carried since childhood. And yet something about Lumina Prime seemed to wake it. He had never felt it react like this before. "Is something troubling you, Diplomat Foster?" the official asked. Samuel blinked and withdrew his hand quickly. "No trouble. Just checking that my extremely important diplomatic equipment is still operational." The official's eyes lowered slightly towards Samuel's chest. "You refer to the object around your neck?" "Yes." "It does not appear to be technological." Samuel nodded. "That's because it's advanced human stealth technology. Very secret." The official paused, then very slowly, one eyebrow lifted. "I see." Samuel leaned back comfortably. "You don't believe me." "I did not say that." "You absolutely thought it." The official allowed the faintest hint of a smile. The vehicle continued forward until the palace complex came into full view. Samuel had seen photographs of the structure during mission briefings, but none of them captured the scale of it. The palace was not a single building. It was an entire formation of massive crystal towers fused together into a sweeping architectural structure that rose from the ground like a mountain of light. Sunlight flowed through the translucent surfaces, filling the surrounding air with shifting colors. Samuel let out a low whistle. "All right," he said quietly. "I officially withdraw my chandelier comment." "You compared our world to lighting equipment earlier," the official noted. "Yes, but this is far beyond chandelier territory." "What territory would you place it in now?" Samuel studied the palace for another moment. "If someone told me a star had decided to become a building, I might believe them." The vehicle slowed as it approached the main entrance platform. Tall guards stood waiting near the gates, their armor reflecting the crystal light like polished mirrors. Their long ears curved elegantly behind their helmets, giving them an almost mythical appearance. Samuel straightened his posture slightly. Diplomatic mode, serious face, professional attitude. The vehicle came to a smooth stop. One of the officials turned toward him. "You will soon meet Queen Aria." Samuel nodded. "I've read the reports." "She is perceptive." Samuel smiled faintly. "That's a polite way of saying she'll know if I'm nervous." The official did not answer. Samuel exhaled slowly and stepped out of the transport. The air of Lumina Prime felt strangely alive, cool, clear, carrying faint vibrations of energy from the surrounding crystal structures. As Samuel walked toward the palace entrance, the medallion warmed again. Stronger this time. For a brief second, an old memory flickered across his mind. A frightened boy, smoke in the sky, and a young girl with long ears placing a small object into his shaking hands. "This will keep you safe." Samuel shook the memory away. 25 years was a long time. People changed. Worlds changed. Children grew into strangers. He stepped through the palace gates, unaware that somewhere deeper within the crystal halls, a queen who had never forgotten that moment was about to meet the boy she had once tried to comfort. Samuel followed the palace officials through a corridor that seemed less like a hallway and more like the inside of a living crystal. The walls were transparent in some places and softly glowing in others, and thin streams of light traveled slowly through the structure like veins carrying energy. He tilted his head slightly as one of the streams passed above him. "Is the building thinking?" he asked. The official walking beside him looked mildly confused. "Thinking? Yes, those lights look suspiciously like brain activity." "The palace is an energy-responsive structure," the official explained. "The crystal lattice distributes power, stabilizes temperature, amplifies communication signals, and reacts to emotional fluctuations within the building." Samuel blinked. "So if I panic right now, the walls will know?" "Correct." Samuel looked around thoughtfully. "Good to know. I will panic responsibly." They continued walking. The corridor opened into a vast chamber whose ceiling rose so high that it almost disappeared into a pale glow far above. Suspended crystal platforms floated slowly through the space, moving along invisible magnetic channels. Samuel stopped for a moment and stared upward. "Please tell me those platforms are elevators." "They are." "Excellent. I was worried they were decorative and we'd have to climb." The official gestured politely toward one of the floating platforms drifting toward them. It lowered smoothly until it hovered just above the floor. Samuel stepped onto it cautiously. The platform rose immediately. He grabbed the railing. "Oh, good," he said calmly. "It moves when you step on it." "Yes. That would have been nice to know beforehand." The official gave him a polite nod. "You stepped on it before asking." Samuel considered this. "That is a fair point." The platform ascended through the open chamber. Below them, palace staff moved across the floor in quiet efficiency. Above them, narrow bridges connected crystal towers that formed the intersections of the royal complex. Samuel watched everything carefully, absorbing the details. This was not just architecture. It was technology grown into structure. Crystal networks conducted energy the way circuitry conducted electricity. Light signals traveled through transparent corridors within the material, forming a communication grid built directly into the palace itself. Human engineers would lose their minds if they saw this place. "Your civilization has been working with crystal energy for a long time," Samuel said. "Several thousand years." Samuel nodded slowly. "Humanity has only been experimenting with similar systems for about a century." The official looked thoughtful. "You have progressed rapidly." "Yes," Samuel said, "mostly because humans tend to invent things accidentally." "Accidentally?" "We try to build a toaster and somehow create a particle accelerator." The official paused. "That seems inefficient." "It is extremely inefficient," Samuel agreed, "but occasionally something impressive happens." The platform stopped gently beside a wide balcony that overlooked the inner palace gardens. Samuel stepped off and immediately noticed the silence. Outside, the city had been full of movement and energy, but here the atmosphere felt calm and almost reflective. The gardens were arranged around pools of liquid crystal that glowed softly beneath the surface, casting rippling light across the surrounding plants. Alien trees with thin silver leaves swayed gently in the air. Samuel folded his arms. Your gardens are nicer than most human cities. We believe leaders should think in beautiful environments. Samuel nodded. On Earth, we usually think in rooms filled with paperwork and stress. That explains several things. Samuel laughed quietly. They continued walking toward a tall doorway framed by two towering crystal pillars. Several palace guards stood nearby, their armor reflecting soft waves of color across the floor. One of them stepped forward and spoke briefly with the official escorting Samuel. Their voices were low and calm. Samuel waited patiently, studying the interior architecture again. The medallion warmed, not dramatically, just enough to make him notice. He touched it again through his uniform. The metal felt almost responsive, strange. He had carried it through dozens of star systems without anything like this happening. Diplomat Foster. Samuel looked up. The official had finished speaking with the guards. You will now enter the council chamber. Samuel straightened his posture slightly. Diplomacy mode again. Professional. Calm. No accidental destruction of alien furniture? Probably. He followed the guards through the doorway. The chamber beyond was enormous, though quieter and more formal than the rest of the palace. A long, crystalline table stretched across the center of the room, surrounded by several alien advisors seated in elegant chairs grown directly from the crystal floor. At the far end stood a raised platform. Samuel's footsteps slowed slightly as he entered. A figure stood there. She had long ears that curved gracefully behind her hair, and her posture carried an effortless authority that filled the room without a single word spoken. Queen Aria. Samuel had seen her image in briefings, but the recordings had not captured the quiet intensity of her presence. Her eyes settled on him immediately. For a moment, the entire room felt very still. Samuel bowed respectfully. Your Majesty. Her voice was calm when she answered. Diplomat Samuel Foster. Welcome to Lumina Prime. Samuel lifted his head. Their eyes met. Something flickered across the Queen's expression. Something small and almost impossible to identify. Curiosity, recognition, or perhaps just the careful observation of a ruler meeting a stranger. Samuel smiled politely. I must say, he added, glancing around the chamber, this is the nicest meeting room I've ever been nervous in. For a moment, the advisors looked uncertain. Then very faintly, the corner of the Queen's mouth lifted, and somewhere beneath Samuel's uniform, the small medallion warmed again. Samuel remained standing for a moment after the Queen's greeting, long enough to ensure he had not accidentally forgotten some complicated alien protocol. When no one shouted at him or activated a defensive laser grid, he took that as a good sign and walked toward the long crystal table. The advisors watched him carefully as he approached. Diplomats were often studied the way scientists studied unusual animals. Samuel was used to it. He took his seat opposite Queen Aria and rested his hands lightly on the table. The surface beneath his fingers was perfectly smooth and faintly warm, as though the crystal carried a quiet internal energy. Queen Aria studied him with calm attention. Your journey was comfortable, Diplomat Foster? Samuel nodded. Very comfortable. Your pilot did an excellent job. I didn't spill my tea even once. You brought tea on the descent shuttle? Samuel blinked. No, but if I had, it would have been safe. One of the advisors looked confused. Queen Aria tilted her head slightly. Humans measure travel safety by the survival of beverages? Among other things, Samuel said seriously, it's a highly scientific method. The room remained quiet for a moment. Then one of the younger advisors allowed a quiet laugh before quickly trying to look serious again. Samuel noticed the Queen observing the exchange carefully. Not offended, interested. Good. Diplomatic progress often began with small things like laughter. Queen Aria leaned forward slightly. We have reviewed the preliminary proposals from your government. Trade cooperation between our systems could be beneficial. Samuel nodded. That is our hope as well. A section of the crystal table illuminated softly, projecting a holographic display between them. Star maps appeared above the surface, glowing points marking trade routes and navigation corridors between human space and Lumina Prime. Samuel gestured lightly toward the projection. Our engineers believe a shared navigation network through the outer sectors could reduce travel time by nearly 40%. An advisor spoke. The outer sectors contain unstable gravitational anomalies. Samuel nodded. Yes, humanity has several of those as well. We call them places where our pilots panic. The advisor stared at him. Samuel shrugged slightly. It's a technical term. Queen Aria's eyes narrowed slightly, though Samuel could see the faintest trace of amusement there again. Your people approach dangerous regions with humor? Samuel folded his hands. Your Majesty, humans approach most things with humor. It's how we survive them. The Queen considered that quietly. For several minutes, the discussion turned fully professional. Navigation corridors, defense cooperation, energy exchange technologies. Samuel answered questions calmly, occasionally making notes on the small data tablet resting beside him. Yet throughout the conversation, he felt something unusual. The medallion against his chest had not cooled. If anything, it seemed warmer than before. At first, he tried to ignore it. Then it became impossible to ignore. It wasn't hot enough to hurt, just present, as if reacting to something for a moment. To your neck, she said for a moment. To your neck, she said quietly. Samuel paused. Yes? You have touched that object several times since entering the chamber. Samuel blinked once. Diplomatic instincts suggested honesty was safer than inventing mysterious lies about stealth technology again. He pulled the chain gently free from beneath his uniform. The small medallion emerged into the light. It was simple, a small piece of metal with faint engraved patterns along its surface. Age had softened some of the edges, but the symbol carved at its center remained visible. Samuel held it lightly between his fingers. Good luck, charm, he said. One of the advisors leaned slightly closer to observe it. Primitive construction, the advisor murmured. Samuel nodded. Oh, absolutely. It's extremely low-tech. Queen Aria's gaze had not moved from the medallion. Where did you obtain it? Samuel leaned back slightly in his chair. That's actually a long story. We have time. Samuel smiled faintly. That sentence usually makes diplomats nervous. The Queen remained silent. Samuel exhaled slowly. I received it during an evacuation, he said. The advisors exchanged brief glances. 25 years ago, Samuel continued, a frontier colony was under attack. Lots of smoke, lots of confusion. I was 9 years old and convinced the universe had decided I was having a very bad day. One advisor frowned slightly. You were present in a war zone? Yes, Samuel said calmly. I do not recommend the experience. He turned the medallion slowly in his fingers. There was a girl there, not human, long ears. He gestured lightly beside his head. Looked about my age. Queen Aria had gone completely still. Samuel did not notice. She saw that I was about to panic, he continued. So she gave me this. He held up the medallion. Samuel smiled slightly. She told me it would keep me safe. The advisors remained silent. Samuel shrugged. I didn't entirely believe her at the time, he admitted, but I kept it anyway. Queen Aria's voice came quietly. You survived. Samuel nodded. I did. He looked down briefly at the small piece of metal. And for some reason, I never stopped wearing it. For several seconds, no one spoke. Samuel finally glanced up. That was when he noticed the Queen's expression. Not diplomatic, not calm, something else entirely. And the medallion in his hand suddenly felt warmer than it ever had before. Samuel noticed the silence before he fully understood it. Moments earlier, the council chamber had been filled with quiet discussion, holographic projections, and the soft hum of crystal energy flowing through the walls. Now the room felt frozen. Every advisor had stopped moving, and Queen Aria was staring at the medallion in Samuel's hand as though it had suddenly become the most important object in the universe. Samuel slowly lowered his hand a few centimeters. Your Majesty? He asked carefully. She did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on the small metal disc. The soft light from the crystal walls reflected faintly across its surface, illuminating the simple engraved symbol at its center. Samuel followed her gaze. Yes, he said slowly. That's usually how people react when they realize my jewelry budget peaked when I was 9. Still no answer. Instead, the Queen rose slowly from her seat. That alone caused several advisors to glance at each other. Royal meetings did not normally involve spontaneous standing. Samuel sat very still. Queen Aria stepped down from the raised platform and approached the table. Each step was calm, measured, but there was something different in her expression now, something fragile beneath the composure of a ruler. Samuel swallowed. "Well," he said lightly, "this is either very good diplomacy or I accidentally brought an illegal artifact." She stopped only a few steps away from him. Her voice, when it came, was softer than before. "May I see it?" Samuel blinked. "The medallion?" "Yes." He hesitated only briefly before sliding it gently across the table toward her. The chain made a soft metallic sound against the crystal surface. Queen Aria reached out slowly and lifted the medallion into her hand. For a long moment she said nothing. Her fingers traced the engraved symbol with careful familiarity. Samuel watched her expression shift. First disbelief, then recognition, then something deeper. The first tear fell before anyone in the room realized what was happening. It landed quietly on the crystal floor. The advisors froze. Samuel blinked in complete confusion. "Oh," he said automatically, "that usually doesn't happen." Queen Aria closed her eyes briefly as another tear slipped down her cheek. Samuel leaned slightly forward. "Your Majesty, are you all right?" Her voice trembled when she finally spoke. "You kept it." Samuel frowned slightly. "Well, yes." She opened her eyes again and looked directly at him. For a moment Samuel saw not the queen of an entire world, but someone searching desperately through decades of memory. "You were afraid," she said quietly. Samuel tilted his head. "That narrows it down." "The evacuation station," she continued. "Smoke everywhere. Ships leaving too quickly." Samuel felt a faint chill move through him. "Yes," he said slowly. "You were holding the railing." His fingers tightened slightly on the table. "Yes. You looked certain the universe had abandoned you." Samuel blinked. "How would you—" She lifted the medallion slightly. "I gave this to you." The words hung in the air. The advisors looked between them, clearly struggling to understand what they were hearing. Samuel stared at her, then at the medallion, then back at her again. A very long silence followed. Finally, Samuel leaned back slowly in his chair. "Well," he said carefully, "this meeting just became significantly more interesting." Queen Aria laughed through her tears. The sound surprised everyone in the room. Samuel rubbed the back of his neck. "Wait," he said. "You're telling me that the brave alien girl who gave this to a terrified human child," he pointed at himself, "was you?" She nodded slowly. "I never knew your name." Samuel blinked again. "And I never knew yours." Another advisor spoke cautiously. "Your Majesty, is this truly the same object?" Queen Aria turned the medallion over in her hand. "I remember carving the symbol myself," she said quietly. "My instructors were very unhappy about it." Samuel smiled faintly. "I'm glad you ignored them." She looked back at him. "For 25 years, she said softly, I wondered if that frightened boy survived." Samuel spread his hands slightly. "Well," he said, "good news." Queen Aria laughed again, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. The advisors looked utterly stunned. Samuel leaned forward slightly. "I should mention," he added, "that if this medallion turns out to be some kind of ancient royal artifact, I am absolutely willing to pretend I knew that." Queen Aria shook her head, still smiling faintly. "It was never meant to be valuable." Samuel nodded. "Then it did exactly what it was supposed to." He gestured gently toward the room. "It kept me safe long enough to come back." The queen looked at the medallion once more, and for the first time since the meeting began, the crystal walls of the chamber glowed slightly brighter, reacting quietly to the emotional energy flowing through the room. No one in the chamber seemed to remember how to breathe properly. Samuel could almost hear the thoughts racing through the advisors' heads. Royal protocol, diplomatic risk, emotional catastrophe. Someone please find the section in the palace handbook titled, "What to Do When Your Queen Starts Crying Over Human Jewelry." Queen Aria still held the medallion, but her grip had softened. She looked at it as though it might dissolve if she blinked too hard. Samuel cleared his throat gently, mostly because silence at that level of intensity tended to make him nervous. and he had already established that the palace would report his emotions to the walls. "If it helps," he said, "I've also cried in meetings, usually when someone shows me budget spreadsheets." A few advisors blinked. One of them looked offended on behalf of spreadsheets. Queen Aria's lips twitched, and that tiny movement seemed to loosen the air in the room. "Budget spreadsheets?" she repeated, voice still unsteady. Samuel nodded solemnly. "Truly humanity's greatest weapon." She let out a soft breath that was halfway between a laugh and a sob. Her shoulders relaxed slightly, the crystal walls dimmed by a fraction, as if the palace itself had decided to stop holding its breath. Queen Aria returned to her seat slowly. She placed the medallion on the table between them instead of keeping it in her hand, like someone setting down a fragile memory. Samuel watched her carefully. He had faced warlords, corporate tyrants, even a particularly hostile AI that had insisted it was legally a planet. None of those situations had felt as delicate as this. "Your Majesty," an older advisor said cautiously, "perhaps we should—" Queen Aria raised her hand without looking away from Samuel. "No," she said, calm returning to her voice. "We will continue." The advisor stopped immediately, though his expression suggested he would later file a complaint with the universe. Samuel leaned forward slightly. "If you want," he offered, "we can pretend that didn't just happen and go back to trade routes." Queen Aria looked at him. "No," she repeated, softer this time. "I have waited too long for this moment to pretend it is not real." Samuel blinked once, then gave a small nod. "Fair," he said. "I waited 25 years too. Although I didn't know I was waiting, I thought I just had poor fashion sense." A younger advisor coughed, as if trying to hide a laugh. Queen Aria glanced toward him. He straightened instantly and looked like a statue again. Samuel's gaze dropped to the medallion. The metal no longer burned with warmth. It felt steady now, like it had finally reached the place it belonged. "What happened that day?" Queen Aria asked quietly. "After you left the station." Samuel exhaled slowly, letting the memory unfold without rushing it. "My parents found me," he said. "We got onto a transport ship at the last minute. I remember the ramp closing and thinking I'd never see the sky again. Then the ship jumped into hyperspace and suddenly everything was silent." He paused, searching for the right words. "When you're a child, you think silence means safety. Now I know silence just means the danger is behind you, waiting to be remembered." Queen Aria's eyes remained fixed on him, absorbing every detail. Samuel continued, voice lighter again to keep the weight from settling too heavily. "I spent the next week refusing to let go of the medallion. My mother tried to take it off once, because she thought it might be contaminated or cursed. I screamed like I'd been attacked by a space monster." Queen Aria's expression softened. "She tried to remove it?" "Yes," Samuel said. "I told her it was my survival device. She told me survival devices do not come from mysterious girls in smoke-filled evacuation stations." "And you disagreed?" "Strongly," Samuel said. "I explained that the girl had clearly been an expert in survival devices. She had long ears. Long ears are a sign of expertise." Queen Aria's laugh this time was real, though it was quiet. Samuel felt his chest loosen at the sound. "I never forgot you," he admitted. "I just never knew where you were, or if you were alive. I assumed you were some random brave kid from some random world." Queen Aria lowered her gaze briefly. "I was not random," she said. "I was already being trained for leadership. My tutors dragged me onto that station because they believed my presence would convince our people to evacuate faster. I hated it. I wanted to be useful, not symbolic." Samuel nodded. "That sounds miserable." "It was," she said. "And then I saw you." Samuel tilted his head. "A small human boy alone in the crowd," she continued. "Your eyes were too wide, as if you were trying to memorize the chaos so you could later prove it happened." Samuel's throat tightened slightly. "I remember thinking you looked like you might break," she said, "and I could not allow that. Not when everything else was breaking." She touched the medallion gently with one finger. "So I gave you the only thing I had," she whispered. "Something I made myself. Something my tutors said was foolish." Samuel leaned back slightly, studying her. "Well," he said, "your tutors were wrong." The older advisor cleared his throat again, clearly desperate to reclaim the meeting. "Your Majesty, the treaty—" Samuel turned toward him politely. We're getting there. The advisor frowned. This appears unrelated. Samuel nodded thoughtfully. Actually, I think this is the most related thing that has ever happened. Queen Aria looked at Samuel again. Connections forged in crisis, she said softly. Do they survive peace? Samuel considered the question. Then he smiled, gentle and a little crooked. That depends, he said, on whether the Queen is willing to renegotiate the terms of my childhood survival device contract. Queen Aria raised an eyebrow. You had a contract? I was 9, Samuel said. I assumed everything important came with paperwork. For the first time since the meeting began, the council chamber felt less like a battlefield of diplomacy and more like a room where two people were finally allowed to exist as themselves. And somewhere deep in the crystal walls, faint streams of light began to pulse slowly again, as if the palace itself had decided this was a story worth recording. The council chamber eventually remembered that it was supposed to host a diplomatic meeting. Samuel suspected that somewhere deep within the palace archives, historians were already trying to invent a respectable explanation for the last hour. Your Majesty cried because of strategic emotional resonance during negotiations. Samuel almost laughed out loud at the thought. Instead, he leaned back in his chair and glanced once more at the medallion resting between them on the crystal table. The small piece of metal looked exactly the same as it always had. Simple, slightly worn, unimpressive by every technological standard. The galaxy. And yet somehow it had just reorganized an entire diplomatic meeting. Queen Aria rested her hands lightly on the table. The last traces of tears had disappeared, replaced by the calm composure expected of a ruler. But something softer remained in her expression now. The distance between queen and diplomat had changed. Not vanished, but changed. One of the senior advisors cleared his throat carefully. Your Majesty, he said, choosing his words like someone walking across a fragile bridge. The trade agreements? Samuel raised a finger. Ah, yes, the extremely important reason I traveled several star systems. Queen Aria allowed a faint smile. Yes, she said, we should address them. The holographic star map returned above the table, glowing softly as trade routes and energy networks reappeared between their worlds. Samuel leaned forward again, but this time the tension he had carried earlier was gone. Something inside him had shifted. 25 years ago, he had been a frightened boy gripping a railing while the universe collapsed around him. Now he sat across from the girl who had saved him, and somehow she had become a queen. Life was strange like that. Samuel gestured toward the map. Humanity can provide long-range navigation satellites for the outer corridors. Our newest models can stabilize hyperspace routes through gravitational anomalies. One advisor looked skeptical. Your technology can stabilize anomalies? Samuel shrugged lightly. Stabilize is a strong word. Let's say it convinces the anomalies to behave politely. Queen Aria tilted her head. You negotiate with space-time? Samuel spread his hands. I'm a diplomat. I negotiate with everything. A quiet ripple of amusement passed through the advisors. The tension that had dominated the chamber earlier was gone now, replaced by something more collaborative. They continued discussing trade, energy exchange, scientific cooperation. Crystal energy systems from Lumina Prime would be shared with human researchers. In return, humanity would open several of its outer exploration routes to Lumina Prime's fleets. A partnership, not just a treaty. Hours passed quietly. Eventually, the holographic map dimmed, signaling the end of the formal negotiations. One of the advisors leaned back slightly. The agreement appears mutually beneficial. Samuel nodded, which is the diplomatic way of saying everyone is happy. Queen Aria looked toward the medallion again. Samuel followed her gaze. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Samuel picked it up and slipped the chain back around his neck. Well, he said thoughtfully, I suppose my survival device worked. Queen Aria's eyes softened. It was never meant to be powerful. Samuel shook his head gently. That's the thing about small acts, he said. You never know how far they travel. The advisors quietly gathered their data tablets and began leaving the chamber, sensing that the formal meeting had ended. Soon only Samuel and Queen Aria remained. She stood slowly. Walk with me, she said. Samuel rose as well. They stepped out onto a high balcony overlooking the crystal plains of Lumina Prime. The sun had begun to lower across the horizon, and the entire landscape glowed with shifting waves of gold and blue light. For several minutes, they simply stood there. Samuel rested his arms lightly on the railing. "Beautiful planet," he said. "It is home." Samuel nodded. "I used to wonder what happened to that girl," he admitted quietly. "The one who gave me the medallion." Queen Aria looked toward the distant horizon. "I wondered about the boy, too." Samuel smiled slightly. "Well, good news. He survived." She looked at him. "Yes," she said softly. "He did." Samuel tapped the medallion lightly. "You know, when you gave this to me, I thought it was magic." Queen Aria raised an eyebrow. "And now?" Samuel shrugged. "Now I think it might actually be something stronger." "Stronger than magic?" "Kindness," Samuel said. The word lingered in the quiet air between them. Queen Aria studied him for a moment, then laughed softly. "You became a diplomat." Samuel sighed dramatically. "Yes, terrible career choice for someone who just wants quiet days. You negotiated peace between two civilizations today." Samuel pointed gently toward the medallion. "I had help." The wind moved softly across the balcony, carrying faint streams of glowing crystal particles through the air. Queen Aria rested her hands on the railing beside him. "For 25 years," she said quietly, "I wondered if that small moment mattered." Samuel looked out across the shining plains of Lumina Prime. "It mattered," he said. He turned toward her. "More than you knew." For the first time since they had reunited, Queen Aria looked completely at peace. Below them, the lights of the crystal city slowly awakened as evening settled across the planet. Two lives that had briefly touched during chaos had found each other again across the vast distance of time and space. And somewhere beneath Samuel's uniform, the small medallion rested quietly against his chest. Its work, at last, was complete.